and welcome everyone to the From Curious to Contract Ready webinar. Kay and I were just discussing, we've been quite excited to do this for some time now, so it's really great to see such a good turnout. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today. Before I start, I want to acknowledge that I am hosting this webinar on the lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people. I pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging, and I acknowledge the enduring connection of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to this land. For a quick introduction, my name is Chloe Breach. I am the Content and Marketing Manager here at Australian Tenders. I'll be jumping in here and there to talk a little bit about, finding tenders and the procurement landscape. But for the most part, it will be Kate leading you through today's content. But before I hand over, I just wanted to add that this webinar will be recorded. So please feel free to leave your cameras and microphones off, and there will be time at the end for a Q&A session. So please feel free to pop your questions in the chat and we will address it at that time. So yeah, without further ado, I'll pass you over to the lovely Kate.
Thank you, Chloe, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Happy Friday. I know that we have quite a few different registrations from across different time zones, so it's happy Friday to everybody. Some of us are a little bit closer to the end of knockoff or to the end of the day than others, but and also thanks to Australian Tenders for joining forces today. We are here to talk about how do you become contract ready. And in the 8 years I've been operating at the Tender Training College, it's probably one of the most common questions I get asked from people is how do I start tendering? And we know that it can be quite a complex and complicated landscape to navigate. So we're here to give some insights and information today about, is tendering right for your business? And, if it is, what is the pathway forward? And also to really sort of shine the light on what's required to be successful in tendering so that you can go in with, the full knowledge, if you like, of what's expected. So as Chloe mentioned, we'll between us present the key sections on screen today. I'm going to start off with some background on tenders and procurement and the benefits and risks of tendering. Chloe will talk to you about where to find tender documents and the procurement landscape, and I'll finish off with how tenders are assessed and the likelihood of winning before we get into Q&As. Tenders and procurement. So obviously, we're here today to learn really, what is tenders and tendering all about? And this word of procurement is basically the name that governments and businesses give the act of purchasing goods or services, and they have procurement policies much like they have quality policies or safety policies. And there's two sides to procurement. That's being the buy side in terms of them wanting to purchase goods or services from the marketplace, as well as the supply side, which is where most of you will come into, and why you're here today, is wanting to supply goods or services back to governments or businesses via an official contract. So it's often when we receive a tender, we can sort of, I guess, take for granted the time it's taken before that tender comes to marketplace. And often the buyer has quite a structured process in terms of getting that tender issued. And it starts with obviously making the decision to buy the goods and services, developing a business case around why that makes sense, developing a procurement plan in terms of, what are their objectives, how are they going to approach the market, what are they looking to achieve, and really to specify those requirements of the contract. So if they will need to develop a scope of works so they know exactly what they're purchasing from the marketplace. And then obviously they go out to market via the tender document. They then receive and evaluate those tender responses to identify a preferred contractor or a preferred supplier. And from there, they award the contract. But importantly, They then monitor and receive those goods and services over the life of the contract, pay you for doing so, and manage that contract till the end. And where we intersect as suppliers is really via that tender document and our responses back to the buyer as such. So as we said, the tender document really is the link between the buyer and winning the contract. And it's the tender document, if you like, that's assessed and scored. And the winner of that process is then identified as the preferred supplier. And effectively, tender documents are made up of typically four sections. So the first section would be some guidelines and rules as to how to carry out the tender process. If we think that an average tender is probably about 3 weeks, there will be rules and guidelines for how you are going to interact with that client who's issued the tender over that period. For example, there will often be an email contact if you've got any specific questions throughout that 3 week period. If you pick up the phone and ring your friend in the department where that tender's been issued, then you're likely to be non-compliant because it's the tender period and the 3 week period, if you like, is governed by strict probity. So they want to make it as fair on each party that's tendering as possible, and hence why those guidelines are in place. So coming back to those four parts of a tender document, we have that overarching guidelines. We've got typically then a draft contract. So the draft contract will become a live contract if you are the preferred supplier. But it's very important for us to review that in the tender period because it gives us all the obligations that we're going to have to perform when we are actually the preferred supplier, and also the obligation of the contracted or the client at the other end as well. Then typically we have a third document, which is the scope of works. So that tells you, exactly what it is that is required to be delivered over the contract. So it could be a technical scope of works, it could be a functional scope of works, or a performance scope of works, depending on what the tender is for. And then the final part of the tender document is what they call the required information. So the sections that you actually need to respond to and send back to the client. And that required information is typically then made up of, as we see on screen, a price. So a price that you put together for the goods and services as outlined in the scope of works and in the contract, that the cost you think it will be to deliver those goods and services over the term of the contract. And then they ask you a whole lot of questions. So those questions, we'll look at a couple later, will actually cover all parts of your business. And then they will be assessed. And we're going to have a look today at just the way in which the buyers assess our tenders. So who are these buyers? Well, I like to call the buyers the client. It just makes it a little bit easier. So, our government, we have government clients who are issuing tenders and business clients that are issuing tenders. And Chloe's going to actually give us some figures around the number of tenders that are released by federal government later on in the session. But we know that government in Australia particularly, there's 3 levels of government: local, state and federal. So all of those levels of governments are issuing tenders. And then in the business side of things, you've got public companies, private companies, not-for-profit, all issuing tenders as well. And government tenders typically tend to be a bit more heavily compliant based. But even so, business tenders are still, the requirements are still quite, I guess, strong would be the word, or voluminous. I think in Australia, our landscape is our tenders are very compliance driven. So what we've got on screen here is basically to show you that the procurement policies actually drive what type of tender document is released. And this is important for us because it means that if the buyer's contract for a goods or service is over, say, 250,000, so they each layer of government, local, state, and federal, all have a threshold that they set. So with local councils, it's typically about 250, 300,000. It can be different for state and federal, but any contract over that amount, they go out to an open competitive tender. So that means that anybody in the marketplace can apply for that tender. However, if the contract is lower than that threshold value, that $250,000, they they're not required to go out to the open market. They can issue what's called a limited tender. Let's have a quick look as to what that. So a limited tender then is just sent out to their preferred supplier database. So how that works for us is that let's take local council, for example, because local council is a great opportunity for businesses who haven't tendered before, potentially to start tendering. Now, and I'll preface that by saying that it really will depend on whether your business um, is offering service geographically based, or it is offering services like my business, for example, which is online. And so it doesn't have necessarily any geographical boundaries to adhere to. Excuse me. I'll just have a. So often, say, for example, we're a tradesperson, say we're a plumber, and we are living in central Brisbane, if you like. We live and our business is located in Brisbane City Council. We're going to, and basically we service the Brisbane City Council area with our plumbing services. A really good place for us to start in terms of looking at tenders is within our local government area with the local council. So Brisbane City Council, for example. So what I would want to be doing if I'm a plumber in that area is registering on the Brisbane City Council website as a registered supplier. So that's the absolute first step. And then I get access and I can submit tenders, importantly, to the council. But I need to be registered before I even have an opportunity to view the tenders to begin with. And then often often councils also then advertise on a reasonably regular basis for what they call panels or schemes. So they are a group, though, so they might, for example, apply or advertise for a plumbing panel. And so plumbers within that local area can apply to be on the panel. And again, the panel is suppliers are approved through like a mini tender that shows your experience and capability. And so as they have plumbing jobs come up, they'll just go out to the members of the panel and ask for requests for quote from those panel members. So it's a really good way to start tendering if your business has a defined geographical space like I just described. And it is important for us too, as well, to what we'll talk about later is identifying where our ideal client is in terms of the contract value, particularly that we're looking to seek. And also to that knowing that tendering is a sales and marketing activity, and that there are other supporting activities in terms of our business development around the tender. So every single council and every government should publish a list of contracts that have been awarded. I think it's at least in the last 12 months or 2 years. So if you go onto each of those government tender pages, you can look to see what contracts have been awarded. And through that, you get a bit of an understanding of if there has been a panel or a plumbing tender, for example, what the cost of that was, who is supplying that. But my suggestion to you is that if you can't find out any information, is pick up the phone, call the council, ask their procurement team, how do you buy plumbing services? We want to register, or we've registered as a local supplier, and we are keen to score some local business. How do we go about that? And they should be able to give you some information about how they purchase plumbing services. So there are also other opportunities in the supply chain that we can take advantage of. So this slide basically looks at where there is a principal contractor, if you like, for, let's say it's a large road construction project. So it might be $1 billion project and it's awarded to a tier one construction company, for example. Now, that construction company will often have maybe 60 separate packages that sit underneath that. So everything from PPE to landscaping to large packages like concrete and all different sorts of packages. And so they subcontract out those packages. And then often there is opportunity to subcontract it in as a small business to those significant subcontractors that win those packages. And that is particularly helpful if that road project is happening in your local area, for example, because the principal contractor and the significant contractor all have obligations to ensure they are employing local businesses within that project. So keeping in mind what projects are happening in your area and looking at the project websites to see how you can potentially get on board with those supply chain opportunities. So just quickly, some benefits and risks of tendering. I'm guessing we're all here today because we see tendering as an opportunity to grow our businesses sustainably through secure long-term contracts. As a small business owner, I know the last few years have been a really rocky ride. And so any opportunity that we have to access new revenue bases or new revenue streams and markets is a really good opportunity for us. And that's primarily what is so attractive about tendering. And our clients are, governments who actually do pay us at the end of the day. And, there is a defined and distinct scope of works as well. So again, you have access went through tendering to a whole range of opportunities that you may not be even aware of are there. And there is also a component of tendering that means that you're giving back to the community. And we'll touch on that a little bit later as well. Look, there are plenty of risks in tendering, as I'm sure you probably have realised. If you think about the risks of actually submitting a winning tender and then delivering the contract, that thinking about the risks if you are awarded the contract and the risks of delivering that contract. So some of the risks associated with actually tendering and putting in that tender submission is potential non-compliance. So that might be things like not answering or not having insurance details, for example, not answering some of the questions, not submitting part of the tender, phoning up your friend in the department, as I mentioned before. Um, Another key risk is obviously cost, and that might be, sometimes if it's too high, it might not win you the tender. Sometimes if it's too low and you pick the winner, you may not make the money that you're anticipating on that particular contract. The third point I've got there is lack of a tender strategy. And what that means is really understanding if your business is going to start tendering for contracts, it needs a strategy in place. So thinking of tendering as, if you like, a way of attracting new revenue streams, thinking of as if it's like a core part of your business and giving it the attention that any other part of your business or core business would have. So thinking about the types of contracts that you want to bid for, the type of clients, the value, and really understanding which ones of those you have the best chance of winning. So obviously, unsuccessful tenders cost us time, money, and effort, and probably too many grey hairs than we'd like to admit. So, you really need to make sure that we've got an opportunity to win the tender. And the final risk there is, once you submit that tender document, you've committed yourself and you've committed yourself to what is in that document. So if you are awarded or become the preferred supplier, you've got to deliver on what you've said you'll deliver. So, keeping that in mind, that if you can't deliver on that, there are a whole lot of ramifications there that will impact your business. So I'm going to hand over to Chloe. She's going to talk to us about finding tender documents.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, finding tender documents. Let's talk about it. A big challenge for people who are just starting out tendering and something that very often gets overlooked is actually knowing where to find the right opportunities for their business. This is because there are thousands of buyers publishing their tenders across thousands of sources online. Let's look at government, for example. In Australia, there are over 500 local councils, and in New Zealand, there are 78 local authorities that make up the local government. And these entities, they're posting their tenders on their own websites, like the town of Cambridge, for example, or through portals. At a state level, each state and territory has its own platform where they're publishing their tenders. So for WA, that's Tenders WA. For Victoria, that's Buying for Victoria, and so on and so forth. At a federal level, while there are many departments that make up this level of government, generally they're publishing their tenders on one centralized website. So that's AusTender for Australia, and that's gets.gov.nz for New Zealand. When it comes to businesses, there are many across Australia and New Zealand, as you can imagine, but they're following a very similar playbook to government. So they're publishing their tenders on their own websites, through portals as well, and through third-party advertisements and publications. Now, I'm sure by this point you can start to appreciate just how many sources there are that these entities are publishing tenders on, and just how resource intensive and time consuming it can be to keep track of them all. I recently watched a seminar and the presenter described time as being your best asset. And that really rings true, especially in today's competitive landscape. You really want to be using time to your advantage and, spend it crafting your bid rather than looking for opportunities and then finding them with tight deadlines. That's why our recommendation, if you're just starting out tendering, would be to do some research into tender aggregates. With a service like Australian Tenders, for example, you only have one platform to find any tender across your nation. And the added beauty of this is that you don't even need to do the searching. You could set up what's known as a tender alert. And essentially, how that works is every time a tender comes out that matches your business's capabilities, we would send you an email that says, hey, we found this tender. We think you might be interested in it. Would you like to come check it out? So yeah, that's a really great way to stay ahead. So I implore you, if you're just starting out, do some research to see whether or not this might be a good option for your business. Now, moving on to the procurement landscape. Now, this is something it's always changing and it's always evolving, but I'm going to do my best to give you a succinct, high-level overview on what we've seen in recent years. Over the past decade, we've seen a steady increase in tender volumes. It hit a peak in 2021 with just over 35,000 tenders being published in that financial year. And since then, we've seen a decline in that number by nearly a quarter. Last year, there was 27,000 tenders being published. And I know what this looks like. It definitely makes it seem like a negative signal to the market, and it seems like there are less projects out there. But that might not necessarily be the case, and I'll tell you why. There are three key drivers for this trend. The first of which is COVID-19. During the pandemic, governments poured money into projects like infrastructure, health, and recovery programs, hence the peak in 2021. It's been a good 4 years now, and a lot of these projects are coming to a close. This very well means that funding is freeing up now that could be directed into projects in the year ahead. The second key driver is policy. The rules for government buying are changing. In some states and at a Commonwealth level, the threshold for publishing tenders did go up during the 2021 to 2022 financial year. And that meant that smaller contracts weren't necessarily going out as public tenders. Instead, companies were being engaged for works outside of the tender process. And lastly, the last key driver is a focus on small business, which I'm sure a lot of people here would be quite excited to see. Governments now have targets to give a certain percentage of contracts to small and medium-sized businesses. So again, similar with the policy point, a lot of these deals are happening directly without being published as open tenders. Now, what's so strong? Well, let me start by saying that the scope of works requested around Australia and New Zealand is very extensive. We've seen tender requests for things like, New Year's Eve festivals, tender requests for drone light shows, all the way up until cadaver transports. So it's safe to say we're always being surprised by what buyers are looking for. But that is all to say that given how extensive it is, we generally categorize tenders into around 600 categories. And on the left here are the top 20 that have seen the highest volume over the past 5 financial years. Apologies, some of the text might be a little bit small, but what we're really interested in are the industries on the right. What's special about these spaces is that no matter what's going on in the market at large, these areas are seeing the steadiest amount of investment. So that's construction and infrastructure, that's maintenance and repairs, and that's digital and software services. An important note about the last one there is that a lot of the bigger contracts we're seeing are issued by governments looking to modernize their systems. So if you're kind of in or adjacent to these spaces, definitely keep your eyes peeled for tenders of that nature. Now, who's issuing the tenders? Well, I'm sure it will come as no surprise to you, given that just before I mentioned that there are over 500 local councils that make up the local government, that it is the local government that issues the most amount of tenders in Australia. Combined, they issued over 12,000 tenders last financial year. They're looking to engage services to cover community projects like roads, parks, and facilities. The state government handles the second largest share, publishing just shy of 7,000 tenders last financial year. Of course, they're looking to engage works for hospitals, schools, and transports. Lastly, I put government tenders, the federal government, sorry, up here. Whilst they did technically post fewer tenders than businesses and companies overall, I thought it was important to note them here because they are generally posting larger and more complex tenders, and they're focused on industries like defense, IT, and nationwide projects. Now, the crux of it all. What does this mean for businesses looking for tender? And more importantly, what does this mean for you? Well, I think the important thing here to consider is what is the buyer of today actually looking for? Businesses that are buyers, they are generally looking for your wow factor or your unique value proposition. And that's essentially what sets you apart from your competition. When it comes to governments, of course, they're also looking for your wow factor, but due to recent changes in procurement rules, they're placing a higher emphasis on engaging local suppliers. They want more SMEs involved in bigger works, and they want to see social and environmental benefits built into contracts. So, for those of you just starting out, these rule changes are actually a good thing because it means that the market is shifting to give smaller businesses a fair share of opportunities. And a really good way to tap into this, and something that Kate covered just before, was to do some research onto panel arrangements. Now, these are really good because it means more certainty for you, it means a steadier workflow, and they allow for you to build a stronger relationship between yourself and your client over the long term. Now, with all that said, I think the key takeaway here is that whilst the numbers are showing fewer tenders, the opportunities are still strong, especially if you know where to look and how to position your business. So, yeah, I'm going to leave that little food for thought with you and pass you back over to Kate, who's going to talk a little bit more about how tenders are assessed.
Thank you, Chloe. Some interesting stats there, and I think I guess one of the key takeaways for me is that um, is really understanding that procurement or government procurement policies are have changed significantly to take into consideration or benefit small business. You'll find a lot of information on any of those government websites that you mentioned there, Chloe, about how small business can apply for tenders. And you know, with the federal government, even as an example, there is a set limit that or there is a threshold limit, and I don't know it off the top of my head. However, tenders under, say, a certain amount, it could be $300,000. Um, there are opportunities that only exist for small business and also for some Aboriginal businesses. But I'll make sure I find some of that information for you and send it through. So you know, while procurement policies are favouring small business in terms of that procurement, in terms of the scoring of tenders, unfortunately, the filling out of the tenders still needs to happen by us as small businesses. And we're now going to have a look at sort of, I guess, what are the things that they're going to assess us on, so we can sort of see where we might score well in a tender. So typically on screen here, we've got the fact that tenders are, there is a price component, as I mentioned before, and a non-price component. And both of those elements are scored to give a total score that then determines the preferred contractor. And what we're going to have a quick look at, am I, is the evaluation criteria or the set of criteria that they use typically to score our non-price information. So that non-price information is all the written information we supply. So all of the information about our people, our safety approach, our quality approach, our environmental approach, our methodology. Each question in a tender document, you would at least be expecting 20 questions, I'd say, at least. Some many more, some perhaps less arduous. Each of those questions are scored against a set of evaluation criteria and a score then given. So that's how they tally up the final score. And if you like, the overarching criteria is what is called value for money. So value for money, and this is I guess some information about value for money will be different or the definition of it will be different for every different, I guess, government. Um, it will mean something different for government, but what it does mean is that achieving value for money isn't always about getting the lowest price, and that is a common denominator across all governments. Doesn't mean just because you've got the lowest price, you're going to win the contract. It's about what they've got here is about the total benefit that your proposal provides over the term of that contract, minus the cost of what you're supplying over the term of the contract. Now, they're saying here that means value for money means measuring cost, quality, the fitness for purpose, the capability, capacity, risk, and more. So this is, I guess, a high level consideration, but quality, you know, the quality of what you have in your offer in terms of the goods or services you're providing is important. How well they meet the scope of works, your organization's capability and capacity to deliver it, and risk. And if there's one thing you take away today, it's risk. It's about demonstrating to the client that's issued the tender that your organization is a low risk and can deliver on what they're proposing or what their tender document asks. Because government and business are all it's all about reducing risk. So just on screen here are some evaluation criteria, typically that the New South Wales government includes as part of their tenders: financial and non-financial costs and benefits of making the procurement, the quality and quantity of the goods and services, whether they're fit for purpose, the supplier's relevant experience and performance history, the whole of life costs of the goods and services. So that means the whole of the costs of the contract from beginning to end, including if you need to transition out those goods or services at the end of the contract, and the environmental sustainability of the goods or services. Then importantly, what it's saying, if you're going for a high value procurement, and this is often the case for construction type projects, additional criteria will be things like supporting small business and regional businesses, so providing employment and business opportunities for Aboriginal people, and supporting apprenticeships and traineeships on construction projects. Those three elements are often just included as part of local government tenders, whether they're high value or not. So even if you're a small business applying for plumbing services or to supply plumbing services to your local council, you will also need to show that you support small business as part of your overall approach. So that would be things like where you buy your fuel, where you buy your cars, where you buy your equipment, those types of things. What is your supply chain, and how do you support small business locally? How do you support and engage Aboriginal businesses and potentially employ Aboriginal people, and supporting apprenticeships and trainees on construction and as well. So typically they're asked, and while we said that the procurement rules are becoming easier for small businesses to win tenders, they still have to address these components in many tenders. And many small businesses that I trained, it is a struggle to work out how to build in these elements within their tender response and within their business. But there are just some key thoughts for consideration today. Oops. Well, I'll just go back to this one. There's a very delicate return there that you have to find. What we've got on screen is a scoring sheet that came from the Queensland government. And you can see that it's scored from 10 to 1. But what we're interested in is just having a look at those, what is the characteristics of a top score, and remembering that they give each question and your response to each question in a tender a score. So if you think if there's 20 questions, there's 200 points there that are available to you. And if there is a range, well, because this is so competitive, you've got to be in that top range to give yourself the best chance. So an outstanding offer in this particular instance is that it's highly convincing and credible. It demonstrates outstanding capability, capacity, and experience relevant to or understanding of the requirements of the evaluation criteria. And the response is comprehensively documented with all claims fully substantiated. So credible and convincing, capability, capacity, and experience. They're those three words again that pop up. And you've got to show that relevant to what's being actually tendered for. And again, that idea of credible, relates back to this last point where the claims that you're making in your document can be fully substantiated. So we could say, we are the leading provider of plumbing services in Brisbane City Council, but if you need the evidence to support that, how many clients do you have? What sort of data and stats do you have available in your business to make your response credible and believable? Uh, this one's probably a little bit harder to read, but it was from a digital transformation agency from the federal government, and an excellent score. The top score here is a 5, and it says the tender satisfies the selection criteria, which is the evaluation criteria, to a very high standard and presents minimal or no risk, and its claims are fully supported by the information provided. So risk and the information is presented in highway. And again, we've got those claims that are fully supported or substantiated. This is actually not a score sheet, but some evaluation criteria from another a tender document. So what is sort of showing on screen, and this I can't remember what this tender was for, but it just shows that the tender response, the evaluation criteria are here. So, for example, we've got experience. It's worth 30%, resources and capacity 30%, WHS 20, and then 20 is left in terms of what they call corporate social responsibility. So your environmental considerations, your buy local, which is what we were talking about before in terms of buying your fuel and your plumbing supplies locally, a reconciliation action plan, and that relates to Aboriginal procurement or employing Aboriginal businesses and Aboriginal people. And disability access and inclusion is 2.5%. So price is what have we got there? Price is sort of factored in a different percentage. So we've got, please correct me if I'm wrong, we've got 100% here. Price will have its own component. So say it's 100%, the non-price is 100%. So the overall score would be out of 200, if you like. But what they will often have is a weighting. So sometimes, for example, they will adjust those scores, and that price actually, out of the 200%, if you like, might actually be worth 120%. And the non-price criteria might be worth 80%. Typically, price is worth somewhere in the region of 40 to 60% of the overall score. But we've seen through Chloe's presentation just how many tenders there are. Every tender is different, every tender is unique, and that pricing scale will be different every time depending on the buyer's requirements. So I'm just going to present now this last section on, well, what do you need to win? So some of the key things we've already seen in that presentation back there. I'm going to play a video. Put your hands up if you can't hear it. Hopefully it'll come through okay.
What makes tendering challenging is that there are many contributing elements to a winning bid. It is important to keep in mind that tenders are a commercial, compliance, and a sales and marketing document in one. Your offer needs to be a quality conforming proposal that will show how your company will deliver benefits and low risk to the client over the term of the contract, while also meeting the requirements at a sharp price. As such, your response needs to be compliant, that is, conform to the tender rules, meet the tender requirements, and contain all the information requested. It also needs to be competitive, so make sure your price is as sharp as possible and your approach provides value for money that helps the client meet its objectives. And also, compelling. You need to highlight your company's capabilities and experience relevant to the contract and sell the benefits of your solution in a persuasive form.
So there is a fair bit there, but I wanted just to start initially that in each tender, in the non-price section, you will be asked what they call to submit a section of mandatory information. So if your tender does not include this mandatory information, then you're ruled out of the evaluation. So typically it takes, it is in the form of a form basically, and it is what's your business name, what's your ABN or ACN, what's your address, provide copies of your accreditations and your business license. If you're a plumber, then show me your accreditation, and insurance. So typically insurance, depending on the type of contract, will be things like public liability and workers' comp, most often professional indemnity, sometimes vehicle insurance, depending on what type of tender it is. And again, the advice we're giving you today is general, given how many tenders are out there, but typically this is what we see. So, so some of the other considerations, I mean, what we just looked at were actual key things from the tender document you need to have, but some of the things that we really, I guess, suggest would be worthwhile is really identifying and understanding who you're going to target. So like any marketing activity, you want to know who your audience is. So you don't start submitting tenders to somewhere that you know, or to some client that you know, or some business that you not even have any chance to succeed. So really identifying who that key client and those key contracts are that you've got the best chance of winning. Give yourself some opportunity to familiarize yourself with some tender documents. That certainly just helps to understand what on earth these things are. Make sure that your digital footprint provides some capability around what you're going to tender for. So the first thing I do when I'm meeting small businesses who want to start tendering is I get online to see whether they have a website, whether they're registered as a business, and I check out, if they want to go from providing residential plumbing services to commercial plumbing services, then put both of those, I guess, elements on your website, so that if a government client is looking at your tender response, they'll do the same due diligence that I just did. Points of differentiation. So we've sort of touched on that a bit, but every party or every company that tenders should be able to meet the requirements of the tender. We should all be able to deliver those plumbing services, but it's what those points of difference are that set us apart, that offer the client the most benefit or value. That really will be, okay, we want to go with this team because they've really got some great value. It might be that the plumbing, let's just say, for example, if your client is really focused on sustainability, that your plumbing, everything about your business, your plumbing business is sustainability focused. So it might be, you recycle all the water, you drive sustainable vehicles, those types of things. But it's a very rich area to explore. So it's not a lot of time we have today to explore that. But thinking about your story as a business and what are your key strengths that you will bring to a tender. Thinking about who's going to do what in terms of a tender. So we saw in that video, we need a cost. We need a contract review. We need someone to write it. We need someone to put it together. Give yourself the opportunity to work out, okay, who in our team maybe has the skills to do that, and work out, okay, well, how are we going to approach this? How do we actually do this? Perhaps we might need a process that we put in place. One of the things that when you tender, you're going to provide the same information or a lot of the same generic information time and time again. So things like, as we looked at, your company details, your insurances. What we want to do is get them together in a single source, if you like, so that we can save time and money rather than going and finding them for each and every tender. There's a bit of a list there on what we would consider some of those key elements of information. Now, I have worked with businesses that haven't tendered before, and they want to start with a real live tender. And you saying, well, have you got your CVs ready? No. So trying to get all that information while you're doing a live tender makes it more stressful than it really needs to be. However, a lot of businesses do go down that path, but having all that information in one place is really makes the process a lot easier and efficient. And that's what I guess in my 20 years experience, if you're doing a 3-week tender, it's not going to take you 8 hours a day over 3 weeks, but it's going to take you quite a bit more time than you probably appreciate. And anything you can do to make your job easier, because you're typically taking people out of your business to put these documents together, and they can end up 20 questions, can end up being, at least 100 pages. So that's quite a bit of information to submit. So again, you want to have a bit of an understanding of what the process is. You want to know what potentially a competitive price is for your industry, a benchmark. Understanding those resources again. And these last 2 points, it's understanding what's in those tender documents to understand is whether, can you win this? Can you deliver those requirements that they've listed? And can you actually get a high score? And you've got to read the questions in a tender document to work out, okay, can I get a high score? So if we just go back to our evaluation criteria here, and if we look at the experience and capacity section, we go into just a couple of example questions. In every tender, I wish I had $1 for every time I read this, because I would be sitting in the Bahamas drinking cocktails right now. Every tender, they ask you for examples of your previous experience, at least 2 contracts or projects that you've delivered successfully that is similar to the contract you're bidding for. Now, here it's worded a little bit differently, but typically you'll need to provide what those contracts are. Now, say you're going for to tender for council plumbing services. The high score in this particular question, where you've got to provide examples of past experience, would be where you've supplied plumbing services to councils previously. Now, not everyone's going to have that experience, but some might. So where you can show that maybe you've supplied plumbing services to a strata or a couple of real estate agents over a couple of years, or a shopping centre over a couple of years. These are the types of projects that you can include. And then they go on and ask about our capacity. So our staff, our availability, our response time, our commitments, our policies. And the capability question comes up about, well, tell us capacity, capability. The capability, well, how many years of experience do you have? What's the rate of growth? What's your size of your business? What's the locations? What's the annual turnover? What are the qualifications? Now, every tender question is different, but these are the types of things that you're going to expect. And it is all about the experience and capability and capacity, because really at the end of the day, as we saw earlier on, they've only got what's in that tender document to assess your company against the next company and the next company. So it's what is written down about your experience and capability that they're going to use to determine if you're a low risk and you're a credible business. But the other aspect we need to consider is, again, delivering the contract, and really, at the end of the day, knowing that when the tender's submitted, and if we're the preferred supplier, you've got to deliver on what you've said, understanding what you're going to have to deliver on, and the budget that you're going to have to stick to, and the requirements that it will take to resource that contract delivery. And one of the things that the reporting requirements, even for some contracts, I know there's someone on this call today who was telling me recently they do some reporting requirements for one of their tender clients, and the tender client is a small business who does some weed spraying, and then the report can be up to 70 pages a month. So just keeping those things in mind, you've got a plan for the future when you're going for contracts. So almost at the end, with all that in mind, we've given you a bit of an idea of what it is or what it takes to get there. And I hope that, there is a lot of information here. It will be available to you in a toolkit that we'll send to you. There's a couple of checklists, and the recording of it as well. as will be sent later. Um, just briefly, I wanted to talk about the college in the, we've been operating for 8 years. I started the business because I wanted to make it easier for people to start tendering and to win contracts. So we understand where you're at, and we can be with you on the journey. It just depends that everybody's tendering journey is unique. And we do have a couple of programs that help you with some of those things that I've mentioned today. And Sonia will just put in a link to the starter program in the chat, just so, or the Q&A, just so you can have a look at what something like that, can provide you. And there's an offer there. We have a bit more of a comprehensive program called the Small Business Bidding Academy, which really just upskills you, to do a lot of those things we've discussed. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand back to Chloe, and we'll see whether we've got any questions to answer.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, I think how we're going to do this is that I'm just going to read out some of the questions that have been asked in the chat, and we'll get through as many as possible. But if we can't get to all of them, we will, send an email out with any additional questions that we can answer. So we'll start off with, let's see. Uh, for those of you that asked, yes, this session will be recorded and we will post it later and everybody will get the link. Um, let's see. Do them sometimes come back to you and say the price is high, bring it down, and you have time to make revisions, or would you immediately lose points and not progress? Okay, so I think what this person asking, Kate, is if you submitted a tender and put a price there, how often is it that buyers will come back and say that the price is too high? Can you bring it down?
Um, Not very often. So, what you submit at the time of when you send that tender in is the price that that you're committing to. And so once it goes in, it goes into, if you like, a box of sorts, and they open the price of everybody that is, has submitted, and they determine their winner based on that type of information. Sometimes there is a period for negotiation when you are the preferred supplier. There is a period of negotiation between being notified you're the preferred supplier and the contract awarding. So, there might be some room for negotiation there, or they might ask you, but yeah, certainly what you submit is often what you have to live with.
Yep. Thanks, Kate. Another question we've got is this person is starting as a new IT contractor. What will count as their experience in their case?
Yeah, it's a good point. So if you've got a new business, and this is a really common question, if you've just started as a new business, then um, you may not have any contracts that the business has performed, or you might only have small clients that you've delivered contracts for. You can potentially use the principal's experience. Say, you've worked 20 years in the business in the industry or what have you, but what you really need to show is what are the contracts that you've delivered as that operating business. Uh, Even if you've subcontracted to you can use contracts, for example, where you've been a subcontractor. It may not directly be to government, but yeah, and I mean, yes, so that would be the answer to that.
Okay, thanks, Kate. I think that might be all the time we have for questions. Or maybe we can just answer one more. What do you think?
Yep, happy to.
Yeah, sure. Well, another one is what sort of writing skills do I need to be able to write a top scoring and compliant tender?
It's a great question. I think at the end of the day, the goal that we're looking for here is to communicate our message about what we're offering. So, my advice here is to just write as simply as possible, because we're trying to give them information about our company and what it is that we're offering. So, I mean, we do obviously give you some guidance in terms of the most important thing is answering the question, and really showing, I guess, bringing out the key points about your business and its experience and capability. But um, really, probably 80% of tenders are written nowadays by people who aren't qualified writers. So, yeah.
Thanks. Okay, I think we will leave it there this time. Sorry, there was a lot of good questions in the Q&A today, so I did want to get through as many as possible, but whatever's left, we will do our best to answer them and send you through the answers in an email. Similarly, if you do have more questions after this, please feel free to give either Kay and I an email, and we'll do our best to get back to you as soon as we can. Is there anything, Kate, you want to say before we close up?
No, just thanks everybody for joining us on a Friday, and have a lovely weekend. And certainly, yeah, please reach out if you have any more questions.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, I'll just close up with saying thank you as well. Everyone, please keep an eye on your emails. We'll be sending you through an email with the tender pack along with the slides and your exclusive discounts. So please keep an eye on your inbox there. But I think that concludes today's session. Thanks everyone for joining, and we hope to see you again in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks.